Well, welcome everyone to our second annual One Country Rural Progress Summit. The first event of the day is our analysis of where we are in terms of investment, whether it's on infrastructure, whether it is restructuring, whether it's broadband. Where are we right now with that next generation of work that needs to be done in rural America? And to talk about this today, we have an incredible cast of characters who are going to be talking about the great work that they're doing. We're waiting for my great friend, Mayor Landrieu, to join us, Lieutenant Governor Landrieu, the grand poobah of infrastructure for the White House. Thanks, Mitch. I hope everything's working out. So we're going to start with the great work that you're doing and let you have a chance to kind of brag a little bit about the wonderful work that's happening because of the infrastructure bill that passed and because of the great outreach that the administration has done, particularly, as you know, in rural America. And so I just want to welcome my great friend, Mayor Landrieu, and thank him for taking time out to explore this important issue with us. So, Mitch, take it away.
Well, good. It's great to see you. Thanks, everybody, for allowing me a minute just to talk about the president's agenda to rebuild the country, especially with investments in rural America. And Heidi, thank you for the contribution you made throughout your life and where you are right now. I really appreciate it. So, listen, it's good to see everybody. I'll try to run through this kind of quickly because it's a lot. But all of you know that when the president came into office, he said, look, I want to do basically three things. I want to try to bring the country together to do big things. I want to restore the soul of America, and I want to rebuild the backbone of America, because if you build an economy from the bottom up and the middle out, then you help build generational wealth. You put families back to work. You basically save small businesses that have been working for a long time in rural America and in urban America, and you make the country stronger going forward. And so as a consequence of that, the bipartisan infrastructure law, the Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS Act, the PACT Act, which helps fund health care for our veterans, all critically important. This is a $1.2 trillion investment in rebuilding our roads and our bridges, our airports, our ports, our waterways, our transit, our rail, high-speed internet everywhere in the country, basically clean air and clean water, critically important to rural America, and then electrifying the economy, and on top of that, resilience. So we have gotten to work in the last 18 months. We've pushed $212 billion out of the door. We have 35,000 projects that are going on across the country in 4,500 communities, all over the place in both rural and urban America. Now, listen, I've been traveling quite a lot on behalf of the president, and I want to just talk to you about some of the things that are important. As you know, folks in rural America for a long time have felt left behind and left out. Heidi, this was your life's work and it was your life's mission. You and I have had conversations about this, along with Kester and Manchin and Sinema and all of the other congressmen and senators that have been so focused on this. And of course, this president understands and knows rural America very, very well. There's $14.6 billion set aside specifically in the bill for just rural America. And on top of that, opportunities in rural America for money in each one of these categories that I have spoken about. So whether it's laying high-speed internet everywhere in America, especially in rural America, for precision agriculture, for telemedicine, to make sure that people have access to healthcare, critically important. We're getting ready to roll out the biggest investment in broadband in the history of the country and really in the world, that's coming out in the next couple of weeks. Tom Vilsack, through the Department of Agriculture, has already laid out $1.2 billion in the Reconnect program for high-speed internet in rural areas, and more money's coming out very soon. Everybody in rural America knows what it's like to try to get a combine across a creek or a road or a railroad track and have a problem with an off-system bridge that has been left behind for much time. There's a huge amount of money in this bill for states to invest in off-system bridges in rural areas, where the federal government gives an incentive for the state to focus there rather than on big bridges in urban areas, because they get 100% federal cost share on those particular projects. On clean air and clean water, nobody understands this better than the folks in rural America, where there are huge numbers of orphan gas wells, oil and gas wells, a huge number of abandoned mine lands, Superfund sites, brownfield sites, lakes and estuaries that have been dirtied by industry that haven't been cleaned up. Billions of dollars in this bill for governors and county executives to work on that area. Everybody knows. I'm from Louisiana. I'm from a rural state. You get in some of these rural communities that have been suffocating from dirty air and bad water forever, not the least of which is lead in our pipes or PFAS in our water. A huge amount of money in this regard. The same thing is true about getting our locks and dams working in the right direction. I was at Lock 22 and Lock 25, right at the heart of Illinois, Iowa, on the Mississippi River the other day, with $800 million investment on expanding that lock and dam so we can get stuff from the ground onto the barges, onto the shelves, and onto the plates and tables of the people of America on behalf of the work that rural Americans do. Not too long earlier before that, I was in Pennsylvania with Senator Casey at Montgomery Lock and Dam doing the same thing, because this is the thing that supports agriculture in rural America almost more than anything else. I found myself recently in the Imperial Valley, in the place where a huge amount of agriculture is done, and talking to a small family that has been working the land, but unfortunately is living in a trailer home, and they're drinking arsenic in the water. So cleaning up and dealing with those issues is critically important. Not long ago, I was in Culpeper, Virginia, and met a woman named Michelle North, who was talking to me about the fact that there was broadband close to her farm, but it actually couldn't make the connection from the street all the way to the farmhouse that was about 500 yards in, because the internet service provider wanted to charge them way too much money to grant that connection. We were talking about the difficulty she was having doing the work on her property without that. And of course, this bill is going to fix that. Orangeburg, South Carolina. I was in Lowndes County, Georgia, not too long ago. There was a woman named Aquila Grant, if you can believe this, and a lot of these rural communities, all rural communities across the country, you will not be surprised to know that not everybody has sewage and running plumbing in the places where they live. And so, listen, the president sees rural America. It's one of the reasons why they put together what's called the Rural Partner Network that was led by Secretary Tom Vilsack, and at that time, Susan Rice, who's just left us a little while ago, who was the head of Domestic Policy Council, to make sure that those communities that got left behind have been the focal point of a huge amount of work that we're doing. On top of that, as you see us work through the clean energy economy and electrifying the economy, and we move from the combustion engine into battery-operated vehicles, you now have every major auto manufacturer wanting to locate a plant that is going to manufacture new products with products that are made in America by workers in America, making a huge number of these investments in rural America. And that is going to be another shot in the arm. And so when you think about high-speed internet and the incredible cataclysmic effect that's going to have of being able to live where you want, not necessarily where you have to work, where you don't have to choose between working anymore and living with the people that you love. When you talk about fixing the infrastructure that's going to help move goods to and from rural America, when you talk about the massive investments that are coming from the manufacturing of this bill, rural America is going to be in a position that it has not been in a long, long time, because Joseph Biden really understands the indivisibility of this nation and why it's so critically important for us to be very bound together. So we're out there telling the story. We're getting the money out of the door. We're working with your governors and your mayors to make sure that this money gets down to the ground as quickly as possible. But I can assure you that this president, unlike any other president that I've ever worked with, understands that the ties that bind us together are much more important than the small things that tear us apart. And his ability to bring bipartisan coalitions together, which he just demonstrated again. Heidi, you've been through this many, many times, unfortunately, with this debt, limit problem that we have. But we were basically held hostage. The president was the adult in the room. The president brought his wisdom, his experience. He worked out an agreement that made sense for the American people, that didn't impede any of the programs that were part of his long values, that didn't touch Social Security, didn't touch Medicare, didn't touch Medicaid, didn't impede the bipartisan infrastructure law, the Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS bill, which of course is a national security issue. And it didn't really impact in a very dramatic way the core values that President Biden thinks are critically necessary. And I will end on this where I began, which is that rural America is now, has always been, and always will be a very critical and important part to the future of America. This president understands it. He knows it. He's one of the presidents that has put his money where his mouth is and delivering, and he has the receipts to show for it. And I just want to thank everybody on this call for their help. We have a lot of work to do, which is why the president says we have to finish the job. And so thanks for that. And Heidi, I'll be happy if I can to ask any questions that you might have.
Well, thanks so much, Mitch. I want to first off congratulate you on your travels. I don't think that, quite honestly, that we can really realistically understand what's going on unless you actually show up. And so
Sure.
I'm just curious, knowing you, I know that there's no grass growing under your feet. How many miles have you put on since you've taken this job?
I don't, you know, I have my staff reminding me how many places that I've been, but I've been to 30 states already. And in each one of those states, I've been to a bucket load of places. So I haven't counted it by miles, but I have counted it by nights of sleep that I've lost, because red eyes are you know, not for the faint of heart. But look, it's been a great joy. I tell you what, you know this because, you know, many of you folks know this. The president counts our success in the names and faces of people that we meet. So, for example, when I was in Pennsylvania with Senator Casey at the Montgomery locks and dams, the president's not just interested in the fact that we're going to expand the lock so that now we can have a 15 barge, you know, tow that moves into that rather than 3, saving 2.5 hours and taking so many trucks off the road. He's interested in that. But you know, he was really interested in when I came back. He goes, man, did you talk to the guys that were actually doing the work? Who was the guy sitting in the crane? Tell me about the guys and the gals that will work in the state departments of natural resources that have to coordinate with the folks with the Corps of Engineers. And I told him about a guy named Willie Maynard. Willie Maynard was really kind of what I call the mayor of the lock and dam. He was the guy that worked for the Corps that had been a generational employee that had built generational wealth. Or if I go to Coatesville and I say, Mr. President, we're building this train depot, and I met a guy that was a third generation Amtrak, you know, employee whose daddy worked there and his son works there, and he's helping people get to and from. The president, the reason we're doing this is to support people like that, right? He wanted to know about, in Culpeper, Virginia, he wanted to know about the woman that I met who had a challenge with getting internet because he cares about her. All of this is driven to stand American citizens back up and gives them the tools they need to, what he says, find some dignity, to relieve the burden and the pressure on them, and let help raise their families so they can have the kind of living that every American deserves. And by the way, one of the things he always says in this bill is these bills are going to create jobs that don't necessarily require a college degree. College degree is fine, you know, but it's not the only thing that you need to survive in America. And the president has already, you know, on terms of bringing receipts, 13.1 million jobs have been created in 2 years of the Biden presidency. Now, you may not have in your mind anything to compare that to, but that's more than all the jobs that have been created in 4 years by every other president, you know, in 4 years, and we did it in 2. 800,000 manufacturing jobs. So when the president says, look, if you give me the ability to put money on the ground through infrastructure, the private sector is then going to come in, we're going to create jobs. He's actually proving already that it works. And these are jobs, you know, that folks don't need a college degree for. They're using products that are made in America. We're using it to go back and rebuild the areas of the country, especially rural areas that have been hollowed out. So these towns and these communities are finding life again. That's how the president sees the world. That's what the whole point of this is.
Yeah, I think when you go back and you take a look at this record, the point that we want to make is, in the past, you know, it was all pretty generic, you know, look at these big macro numbers. But when you drill down to the investments in rural America, I don't think there's ever been a president since FDR that has made this level of commitment to places that you and I know desperately need the attention. And so we're grateful that we have this president, but we're also grateful that he's had the good sense to put you in charge. Want to make just a couple points. One of which is, a lot of people are talking about the money that's being spent, and there's a lot of concern about debt and deficit. But one thing that I always remind people, handing a failed infrastructure to the next generation is just another way to pass on debt. we've got to fix our roads, we've got to fix our canals, we've got to fix our transportation system. And so when you look at good investment, good expenditure of federal dollars, man, this is the way it should be. These are not dollars that are getting wasted. These are dollars that for too long are addressing real critical problems. But the other thing I want to point out, because a lot of people think about rural America and they think about agriculture. And of course, I spend a lot of time, and you coming from Louisiana know how important that industry is to states like ours. But about a third of all of our rural counties are extraction counties. They depend on energy. And if you could just, Mitch, before you have to take off, as a Louisiana and North Dakota, share a concern about this transition, this energy transition. And I know that the president is deeply concerned about making sure that the workforce understands that they are going to get good paying jobs out of this transition. Could you just spend a little time talking about that transition for an energy worker?
Yeah, two things. First of all, I am from Louisiana. I was a lieutenant governor. We have 64 parishes. You guys have counties, but our parishes are the equivalent. And I got around pretty good and understood how important agriculture is to the United States. So it's critically important. But as Heidi has pointed out, and for people that don't really understand, that's not the only thing that happens in rural America. Heidi, that's why I'm so excited about the internet. You know, what COVID reminded us of that maybe we had forgotten was that if you have access to knowledge through the internet, you can basically work from anywhere. And this terrible choice that people have had to make about doing the work that you wanted to do or being able to live with your family, when we deploy all of this high-speed internet, you're not going to have to make that choice anymore. And that's going to change where people live, and more people are going to continue to live, as you know, in rural America because they can. So that's really important. Secondly, as a consequence, different kinds of businesses, not just agriculture, are going to be headquartered in rural America. On the energy transition, your state, North Dakota, Louisiana, of course, Oklahoma, fossil fuel states, in this transition where we're moving into a cleaner energy economy, you have this tension that exists in all of our states. And one of the things the president wants everybody to really know about is the kinds of jobs that are going to be created are new jobs that pay a lot of money. That actually the skills that you use in whatever you're doing right now, like my son, who works my son fabricates valves for the oil and gas industry. He works on a floor with a bunch of guys. All right, the exact skills that they have that they're using right now will be transferable to all of the new jobs that are going to be created in the clean energy economy, and there will be a smoother transition over the appropriate period of time for that. I'll give you an example. I was in Nashville not long ago. You'll remember the tragic shooting that was there, and I was there shortly thereafter with the First Lady to commemorate that tragic event. But while I was there, I took the time to go into a county outside of Nashville that it was in a rural area where there is a company called Tritium that has built a headquarters in rural America that had something there before, but then it hollowed out. This is a battery manufacturing company. It was in Lebanon, Tennessee. And when I walked into this brand new spanking blue plant, it was clean. Folks were actually building batteries, electrical vehicle charging stations, and other things of that nature. And I had talked to a number of people that had worked in the oil and gas industry that had decided that they wanted to transition into this industry. And I said, well, how did that work for you? And they said it was seamless. And the jobs were good. The jobs were high paying. And you're just having those different opportunities sit side by side in communities throughout the country. Eventually, this transition will take place. It's critically important. But the jobs that are being created are very, very high value. And the skill set is very, very similar.
Yeah, I can't say enough about how we need to have that conversation with our energy workers about what a great opportunity this is going to be, not just for them, but for their kids and for their grandkids and for the entire community and these energy producing communities.
Can I mention one more thing about that to just kind of deal with the elephant in the room? But for years, there was this kind of thought that some people were trying to demean people that worked in the oil and gas industry or in the coal industry. This administration sees that very differently. For folks that worked in the coal industry, let's say in West Virginia, and some that are still are, they made a great contribution to this country. If you talk to a lot of folks that worked in coal before, they say, I don't really understand. I went down in that hole. And the reason I did it and the reason I sucked up that dirt was to make sure that our armed forces, our companies had what it is that we needed to compete internationally. And that is a job that had great dignity. That is a job that had great work. That was a great contribution there. So this move into a new kind of energy is not from, at least from this president's perspective, to say that work was demeaning in any way. The president really lifts up, men and women who actually built this country, and it's critically important. But that is not to say that we can't get ready for what the demands of the future are going to, and make sure that we transition, which is why Secretary Vilsack had something called the Rural Partners Network, so that if we're going back into communities that got hollowed out, that we're actually working with people to make sure that they're connected to jobs, cleaning up abandoned mine lands that have been left behind. It's important that the people that dug those and worked in them actually help clean them up and benefit from the rejuvenation of the communities. And there's money in this bill to do those things as well, because the president, as you know, sees every person as critically important and talks about the dignity of work and every worker in America, irrespective of where they're working. That's just where his heart is.
Yeah, and every person is important. I mean, we have a labor shortage. Some people would say we have a shortage of good-paying jobs. Man, we're changing that as we look at these opportunities. I want to remind everyone, if you want to get a sense of what this commitment is and where it is, there's a website called invest.gov. And it outlines where all these investments are going and where this money is going. And Mitch, do you want to pitch any other place where people can go and find out the wonderful work that you're doing and that the president and the White House is doing?
Yeah. Well, invest.gov is that we pushed that out yesterday. It will show you where every one of the public investments are in the country, and it will show you where the private investments are in the country. And you will notice from that map that it is all over rural America. It is all over rural America. There's another website called build.gov that's got more detailed information about it. And then on the internet, you can go to getinternet.gov. So anybody living in and around you that is living at anywhere near the poverty level can actually go on that and access high-speed internet as we speak. And as we continue to roll these things out, you will see the number of jobs that have been created going up. But that document right there at invest.gov is the accountability website for all of you, so that we can demonstrate that we're in real time getting 32,000, projects off the ground. And that number is going to grow pretty fast in a reasonably short period of time.
You're a doll. Thanks so much for doing this, Mitch. I know you're very busy, and you better not come to North Dakota without giving me a ring.
Never do that. Thank you, guys. I got to jump. I'll see you later.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Right.
That's a great jumping off point for our next two panelists, but we're going to go ahead and introduce our other two panelists for this segment of our program. And so I want to start by welcoming Tuck Rainwater. Tuck is the Senior Vice President of State Government Affairs for Comcast Corporation, where he oversees Comcast's state-level government affairs activity, including executive and legislative branch strategies, policy initiatives, intergovernmental affairs, and business coalitions. Also joining us is Harry Moser. Harry founded the Reshoring Initiative to bring 5 million, yes, I'm not kidding, 5 million manufacturing jobs back to the United States after working for a high-end machine tool supplier, A.G. Charmy. He was the president in president in 1985 and retired in 2012 as chairman emeritus, largely due to the success of the Reshoring Initiative. Harry was inducted into the Industry Week Manufacturing Hall of Fame in 2010 and the AME Hall of Fame in 2021. So if you look at invest.gov, it's not just federal dollars, but it also is what is private industry? What are the partners that this White House has? What are they investing in? How are we multiplying these dollars with private investment? And so I'm going to ask each of my panelists, Harry and Tuck, to spend maybe 5 minutes talking about why they're on this panel, and then maybe the three of us can have a conversation. So, Tuck, why don't you start first?
Great. Thank you very much. And I'm very happy to be here. As you know, Comcast is deeply engaged in rural broadband build out through the various federal programs that have been enacted in the last few years. But what you may not know is that we've actually been involved in the effort in a much more moderate way, stemming back over a decade from the earlier stimulus when several states had broadband programs, and I was part of the team in Vermont that actually worked with the state to leverage our existing networks to reach unserved people back then. And so over the last while, when states have had these broadband programs that have stood up, working obviously in an environment where the states were making their own budget investments in these, we've partnered with a number of states across the country, and now with this generational amount of money to really solve the digital divide. We are fully engaged in the 39 states in our footprint, working with the state broadband offices that have either been at it for a while or was stood up in anticipation of BEAD, and also working through whatever state local fiscal recovery funds are being used, or certainly the capital projects funds. And we've been actively engaged, partnering with states to extend and leverage our existing networks to reach more and more people. And to the point that you all were making about private investment, I mean, this is us putting billions of our own dollars on the barrelhead as well to partner with these states, using the federal dollars to leverage the networks. But the other aspect that is incredibly important too is the ACP program, and I know we may talk about that a little bit more later. But that you can build the network, but in our experience, people deciding that they want to participate in the digital economy, they want to they feel comfortable getting online, is not just a question of whether it's available at the end of their driveway or at their apartment or wherever. There are other factors. Cost is what ACP takes care of, but there are other aspects of getting people online that is incredibly important. Comcast has been making investments in that over the past decade with our Internet Essentials program and other things that we've done to help people understand the relevance of being online and all of the benefits that you can derive, whether it's telemedicine or working from home. Obviously, the pandemic brought that to light as an incredibly important aspect. But we are as engaged with the states, talking about how they might utilize digital navigators and other things sort of beyond the build, where you get the networks in place, but then you're also investing in making sure people understand the relevance of getting involved in the digital economy and figuring out how to make the internet work for them. So I'm really happy to be part of this conversation. And I'm sorry the mayor had to leave, but his home state is a perfect example of a broadband office that sort of reached out and said, how can we work together? And we're actively working with them as they're making their plans to strengthen our partnership and say, where does it make sense for us to go? How can we help?
This is something. When I first got to the Senate, Shelley Capito and I started the Rural Broadband Caucus just to bring attention to these problems. Now, we were fortunate in North Dakota, in part because of leadership in having a pretty robust rural system. Wasn't perfect, still isn't perfect. But I think when we started back then, people were like, well, do we really need it? What is this newfangled internet? Well, listen, there isn't anyone in America today who thinks you can thrive as a community or as a region of our state without having connectivity, without that ability to reach out to the broader elements and really global elements that are critical. And so I'm going to just ask a couple questions before we bring Harry into the conversation. But one of the concerns that I hear is about duplication. That this is really about prioritizing the last mile, making sure that people who've had nothing actually get served first. Can you give me a sense of how you think that's going, not just with Comcast, but the rest of the country as you look at this, as you work with state government and state authorities?
It's a really important question to ask, and I think it's going well in most places. But there are certainly, with this amount of money in play, there are certainly, interests who would like to see money go to areas that are already served, and we're doing our best to partner to get into those underserved and unserved areas, and that's what we're focused on. But it is. This is a big problem to solve. I mean, some of the rural areas, I mean, your home state being no exception, are incredibly not dense, and it makes deployment incredibly expensive. And so if we don't use, yes, it's a ton of money in BEAD and capital projects and others, but we're probably going to need quite a lot of that to get everybody served. And, one of the principles that we've always adhered to as a company in working with states on broadband programs over the last decade is the concept of technology neutrality. Now, we're building a lot of fiber now. That's what most people want to see, but for some solutions, that may not be the most effective answer. And, in order to make sure that we actually solve the problem this time around, I know it was a problem that plagued the stimulus from 10 years ago, where a lot of it went to duplicative networks or to other things like that. I think the program designed to focus on unserved and underserved is really important and seems to be working. But we just have to remain on guard that we're not making duplicative investments. We sort of talk about it as the Thanksgiving dinner analogy. You alluded to it as let's make sure everyone's had a first helping before you go back for seconds.
Well, and of course, I'm always going to be hyper focused on making sure that our Native American reservations, which are in some of the most rural parts, have this connectivity. I mean, when we look at how, and I want to make this point, if we look at how absolutely critical it is for healthcare. I mean, now we're turning more and more towards telemedicine as a replacement for that rural hospital, as a way to connect with a healthcare provider. If you're 50 miles from or 100 miles from your nearest healthcare provider and you don't have broadband, I mean, you're not going to get quality healthcare. And so, thank you so much for this is an important issue. This is something that we've been talking a lot about. It's not the end all and be all. And I loved what you said about, look, you can build the system, but people have to know what that system can do for them in terms of economic growth and economic opportunity. And so I want to bring Harry into the conversation. I love what you're doing on bringing manufacturing back to the United States from a perspective of somebody who ran a small manufacturing concern. What does this look like, and how did you get personally involved in this, Harry? And how are you seeing the deployment of these investment dollars, urban to rural? If you can address that, that'd be great.
Okay, I'm assuming you meant how did I get involved in reshoring? I assume that was your question. Sort of, I think, interesting story. I grew up in Elizabeth, New Jersey, right across the river from New York City. And the biggest thing in town was Singer Sewing Machine. It was their main plant in the world, and it had 3 million square feet, 5,000 workers. It was the biggest factory of any kind in the world 120 years ago. My dad ran a third of it. My grandfather was a foreman. I went past 20 years ago, and it's all gone, wiped out by imports. Entirely wiped out by lower price imports coming in from lower wage countries. And throughout my career, I sold CNC machine tools, foundry equipment, things like that. And consistently, companies and industries got wiped out before I could sell anything to them. And so I said, well, somebody's got to do something about that. And when I retired from running companies, I said, I'm the guy. And for the last 13 years, that's what I've done. It's been a pleasure. It's been very rewarding.
So when you look at kind of over those 13 years of working, give me a sense of how optimistic you started and how optimistic you are right now that we can rebuild the manufacturing sector in our country.
I'm always optimistic. When I started, no, almost no one else was. I got very nice support from several trade associations, companies, et cetera. But most people, most economists, most learned experts kind of thing, oh, they're never going to happen. You can't get it back from China, blah, blah, blah. And you have to excuse the noise. I'm at O'Hare Airport, so you can hear a little background. The first year, in the year 2010, when we founded it, in that year, we identified 6,000 jobs announced coming back. And last year, 2022, 360,000 jobs announced coming back, at least half of which are directly the result of the programs that you're describing here, including the IRA. So it's gone from interestingly, I think it's gone from nobody believes in it at all, and Wall Street and Harvard Business School were telling companies, cut back to your core competence, just do R&D, finance, marketing, and push that commodity stuff off to China or India or somewhere else. And now Wall Street we have several banks that get our data and they use it and take it out and they tell other companies how to benefit by reshoring. And it's become now the hot ticket. So it's been very, very rewarding to see it so well received.
Well, absolutely. And when you look at it and you think about kind of the automation that has happened in manufacturing, these are in many ways, and I want to connect the dots here between the two of you. In many ways, these are high-tech jobs. When you walk through the Bobcat plant, as I have many times, and you look at the high-efficiency welders and people basically almost computer programmers who are doing that level of work, I think that has really positioned the United States to be kind of a premier manufacturing center, given our commitment to training, our commitment to working to make sure that these jobs come back, but that these jobs are not just standing, with a rivet gun and put an automobile together. These are jobs where people are standing by computers. They're watching the robotics do the welding, making sure that the quality is there. And these are folks who are very well paid. And so I want to have you talk a little bit, Harry, about the structure of kind of what these jobs are and what they mean for a family in terms of people who are now going back to work in manufacturing.
Well, actually, the jobs, especially the skilled jobs, the kind you're talking about, people, for example, who have gone through an apprenticeship or have a lot of credentials behind them, those jobs, average income is at least equal to that of the average person with a bachelor's degree. And so there's a great opportunity for people to come right out of high school or even starting in high school, go into an apprenticeship, get that training, 3-4 years of training, and be within a few years be making money that is equivalent or higher than that which you'd expect with a bachelor's degree. And then if they choose to, go on and get a bachelor's degree in engineering and management or something else that then makes them, they're then holding the best of all hands in the game. And the people that I know that have done that started out with that practical background and now are the key to being able to use that automated equipment, they're very happy. They love their work. They make something. They at the end of the day, it isn't like there's a pile of paper that moves from this side of the desk to the other side of the desk, but they see real products, real things that go out, have high quality, that help somebody in what they want, refrigerators, stoves, cars, whatever it is. So it's a great opportunity for people.
So Harry, when I'm thinking about this, we have a labor shortage in this country. And one of the complaints that we hear often is that manufacturers are looking for workers and can't find the level of skilled workers. What's your response to that? And if somebody's on who's saying, look, I'd like one of those jobs you just talked about, how would they go about kind of getting connected to opportunity?
First, how to go about it is the high schools should be having appropriate programs. Sometimes it's hard to get a density of enough students to do it. Then it's the community college's job. But then it's the company's job to have the apprentice programs because they're the ones that are going to benefit. And so the the student should, I'd say, go to the community. If they don't find anything, go to the community college. And then the companies, the local companies should be working with the community college and helping and supporting and tours and various programs to get the kids involved and get them out there working for the companies. And the companies that have done it and the communities that have done it are brilliantly successful. And the kids are having great careers. There's some things the government can do, and since you've got connections there, I always, I'm always furious when I see charts on the Department of Labor and Department of Education websites. I'm sure you've seen them, a bar chart like this with number of degrees, no high school, et cetera, income going up, and a headline like $1 million more lifetime income with a bachelor's degree versus a high school degree. And I've been working for years to try and get them to put the average income of people who passed an apprenticeship or have 5 or more credentials in here, show that it's equivalent and that it doesn't require the couple $100,000 of tuition. It doesn't require 5 years of not making any money, and such that the lifetime net worth is higher for the person that does that. But the Department of Labor, Department of Education don't communicate that effectively to the student and the guidance counselor. So if you have any connections, I'd appreciate your help.
I tell the story. I talked to 500 North Dakota kids at close up when I was in the Senate, and I asked them, okay, so how many of you going to college? They all pretty much raised their hand, and I said, who's going to be a plumber in here? How many are going to be a plumber? And one little guy in the back kind of raised his hand, and I said, I want you all to look at him because he's going to be the richest guy in the world. Because I don't know what you're all doing, but I know you're going to need a plumber. So, and if 500 people, 500 kids, there's only one plumber, he's going to be pretty busy.
Yeah. Let me add to that. That the plumber is important because you're always going to find enough plumbers eventually because U.S. plumbers compete with other U.S. plumbers. But when we're competing with China and other countries, we have to be productive. We have to have the smart people with really good skills running really automated equipment. And not to undercut what you said, but over the last 12 years, U.S. manufacturing labor productivity has increased less than 1% a year, while Chinese productivity is increasing at 6% a year, and they're already getting pretty close to our level. So we need to step it up. There's been good automation. There needs to be better, faster automation and better training to make it happen.
Right. The other thing, and I'm going to turn back to Tuck, but the other thing that I would say is I watched someone recently on a business news channel, and they asked, he's an AI expert on artificial intelligence, and he said, okay, knowing what you know about AI, what career shouldn't someone go into? He said, don't go to law school because you're going to get replaced by chat CPAT, and so it's like, what are we going to, what does the workforce of the future look like? And we know that because of the work of people like you, Harry, that workforce is going to be diverse. And I think you're right about being able to be competitive on productivity with China is absolutely critical. So, Tuck, none of this happens without the internet. None of this happens in rural America for small manufacturers unless they, number one, have access to their market, but also, this technology piece that is absolutely critical. So when you look at an integration between the work that you're doing and small manufacturing concerns in rural America, have you seen any good news stories there? Or have you seen any hope that's coming that these manufacturing facilities can in fact be in places like Carrington, North Dakota, and not just Elizabeth, New Jersey? Not knocking Elizabeth, New Jersey, Harry, but let's talk about the Carringtons and the small 2,000, 3,000 size communities.
Well, I think the leveraging the BEAD program and CPF and the other investments is certainly going to help. I mean, Comcast has worked with municipalities, counties, cities, for years to make sure that any industrial park they're setting up or whatever, if they're planning for it and we can build to it. We've done a lot with our private capital in that regard, but we certainly want to make sure that those interests are accommodated in the state's planning for the use of the BEAD program. And quite honestly, a cable broadband network has the same capability regardless of where you are on the network. So whether you're in the middle of downtown of a very urban area or at the edges of the network that we've extended, you've got the access to the same speeds and capabilities regardless of where you are. And so to the extent that we're involved in the build, you can know that will be the case. And I think that would certainly help with any of the manufacturing or other elements that you just mentioned. But again, just making sure that we stay focused on getting broadband to the unserved and underserved areas is so crucial to the success of this, and to have the manufacturing sector thrive regardless of where someone wants to be located.
Yeah, I used to, when I would visit local concerns in North Dakota, a lot of the challenge, even back when I was in office, was finding workforce. And I used to say, look, and it's probably now, given the expansion of streaming services, I said, if somebody can't order a pizza and stream Netflix, they don't want to live there.
Right.
And so let's talk about the importance of this for workforce development, for making sure that people feel like they have all the amenities of bigger places and still are able to live in rural communities.
Yeah, I mean, the capability of the network is important, for people to have access to all the services that they're looking for. And, I think there's certainly the workforce that's necessary to build the network in the first place. But then obviously you need, we have hundreds of thousands of employees at Comcast that work to maintain the network and to make sure that the customers are taken care of if there's an issue. So those are the types of investments that private capital will continue to make sure that these new networks that the federal government has invested in remain robust and remain viable and useful to people no matter where they are across the country.
I'd like to add something to that, if I may. So
You bet.
My focus is on reshoring manufacturing, but we've also looked at reshoring IT, the kind of thing that tends to go to India and places like that. And it can be a very good job. And there's a trend towards rural domestic IT outsourcing. So wage rates that are less than Palo Alto, for example, kids that are happy to stay in their hometown and go to Sunday dinner with Ma kind of thing, and can be trained at the local community college. And that tends to produce a service that's very competitive with with India, especially if you include all the disadvantages of dealing at a distance. So having the broadband enables that IT domestic outsourcing to happen. So I think that's an additional benefit.
Well, I don't think there's any doubt about it. I want to ask about the role of state governments. Obviously, you look at the infrastructure bill, you look at the IRA, which, the mayor and I were just talking about how that is really focused on helping workers transition. You look at the CHIPS. You look at all of the kind of infrastructure development. But what I think people don't understand is how critical state governments have been to this effort. And as they're looking at solutions, I think there's always this inclination to turn first to the federal government. But the federal government is sending a lot of money to state governments to make the system works. How is it? If you guys were going to look at a model of a state that is particularly successful in their outreach and successful in their planning for investment of these dollars, what would you say would be a gold standard structure for a state?
I've gone first a bunch, Harry. If you'd like to go first, that's fine.
Are you speaking mainly in terms of skills and training?
Well, or tax incentives, R&D tax incentives. What are states doing to leverage these dollars and make sure that they're competitive in their state?
Yeah, there's certainly been huge state expenditures. Ohio has always had a great program. Jobs Ohio is a group that's done a very good job. I'm sure rural and urban, the whole thing. Also comes to mind Kentucky has been rather successful. They have something called the FAME program, or very successful apprenticeship program in Kentucky. But these things tend to be community by community, often not even at a state level. And but those are two that come to my mind especially.
What
And,
about you, Chuck?
with the CPF and BEAD programs, I mean, both of those programs specifically give states roles in planning and making sure that the state's goals are met. And so we have been working hand in glove with a number of states across our footprint. I mean, I referenced earlier that Louisiana has done a very nice job of stakeholdering and reaching out to people across their state, providers, parishes and others, and it's been a very good collaborative model where they're taking a lot of input, and they're not just sort of listening to a smaller core of people who think they know better. It really is a nice collaborative approach. So I would definitely tout Louisiana. Florida's done a very nice job with that, where they've done these regional meetings, and they were very deliberative through their Department of Economic Opportunity, and they've been working their way through the capital projects fund money. We partnered successfully to extend our networks to over 50,000 homes already, and we're still going. And so it's the states that do the stakeholdering right and involve people from across the spectrum. Not that everyone needs to agree. Comcast doesn't need to get its way 100% of the time, but we want to be actively involved in the conversation. And so the states that are doing that particularly well, we think are going to be most successful long term in making sure that the money gets spent as effectively and efficiently as possible, so that this problem of the digital divide really gets solved this time around.
So if I can just turn to kind of the future, you guys, there's a lot of stuff in the pipeline, and you heard Mitch talk about it. You go out and invest.gov, you can see it. There's just a lot of work and a lot of attention to deploying the resources that you've been given. And we know that state government plays a role. But let's just look at the next iteration. Tell me what additional work needs to be done, additional investments, if that's necessary. What do you see? And then I'm going to ask you, as we conclude this, to kind of think about what your goals would be for rural America, in both reshoring and in deploying broadband, when you look at kind of where that goes. So let's first start with what more can be done. What additional policy initiatives or implementations would you emphasize to policymakers in Congress or in state governments?
So this, Harry, I'll pick that up. To me, first priority is always workforce, because you need it for two reasons. First, you need more people because I want to increase output by 40%. That's my goal. That's my mission. Increase it by 40%. That's going to take more people. And second, you need better trained people to be more productive, so that we can reduce our costs, be more price competitive with China, India, and so on. So more of the work will come here. So to achieve that, I'd love to see what I described before with that chart. I'd like to see apprenticeship loans that make it easier for companies to be able to afford a really good student as an apprentice, and that student being able to make enough money under the apprenticeship to have a family, to do whatever they want to do, and have the company pay off the loan after they graduate and stay with the company. I'd like to see SBA loans for lower credit manufacturing companies, contingent on hiring apprentices. You can't get the money, we think you might be okay with it. We'll loan you $250,000 for every apprentice you hire. I'd like to see the U.S. level the playing field. The biggest reason we've lost so much work in manufacturing and IT and everything else is that the U.S. manufacturing cost is unfortunately just high. We're like 30 or 40% higher than China, without subsidies, without anything else, 30, 40% higher. And to fix that is going to take the skilled workforce, like I described. And I'd like to see the dollar reduced by about 20%. I know that's a controversial subject. I know it's controversial, but it would make companies would instantly react to that and pay for trillions of dollars of investment into the United States. And it would only increase price levels by maybe 3 or 4% one time. So I think it's worth considering.
Harry, I mean, I once was asked by a colleague, I just can't figure out if high dollar value is good or bad for North Dakota. I said, let me help you. We're a commodity state is bad. when we can, when people can buy more of our product with fewer dollars, we're in better shape. And I think that's true. You know, we don't want to in any way jeopardize the United States dollar as the reserve currency. It still is the gold standard, but it does for those of us who produce things that we would like to export, and want to be competitive in a global economy. A high dollar value does limit our exposure, but I don't know that we're going to pass that recommendation on completely. Tuck, if you have some suggestions, obviously lots of dollars being deployed, lots of people bragging about this work. You know, across the aisle, and they all deserve credit because we all worked on it. But you know, I think there's always an important thing to turn to say, what more can we do to make sure that everybody has access, because it is life-saving, not just work producing, but life-saving.
Sure, I'd highlight a couple of things. I think first, you know, we're heading into BEAD now. The allocations will be made plain fairly soon at the end of this month. And, you know, states will then have to put together their plans to implement BEAD. And there were some rules that came down from NTIA that were pretty comprehensive. I think finding flexibility for states to really identify their own needs and work within the parameters, and obviously bearing in mind the very important criteria of getting to the unserved and underserved areas, finding flexibility within those plans so that the states are really in the driver's seat as to where the investments need to be made, I think is going to be really crucial for it to be a successful program, as opposed to a cookie cutter approach that might work in one place but not in three others. And so, you know, keeping that state voice involved, that, you know, presuming they've done appropriate stakeholdering and all of that, you know, having flexibility in the approval of those plans is going to be really important, I think, going forward. And then the second thing that we need to keep a close eye on is barriers to deployment. You know, some places it's very easy to expand networks, to get the permits you need to push through things, but to get this done timely, to get all this money spent over the next 5-6 years is going to take a concerted effort to really reduce some of the timing barriers that it takes. So sometimes, you know, we'll have the money in place and it'll take us 6 months to get approval to go up on a utility pole. There are things like that that just take time, that if we worked on it together, I think with all with the goal of getting people connected, then, you know, that's something that we really should be working on together, is finding a way to reduce the time delays that it sometimes takes to get these networks deployed.
We aren't kidding. Time is money. You know, a delay is not something that is good for rural America. I want to then have you help me envision kind of in 10 years, how will your work that you're now, you know, so committed to, both of you, how will that change the face of rural America? I know it's kind of a it's not one you guys were handed to prep, but I think it's always important when we're having these conversations to really, you know, have people think about, why is it important? I mean, it almost during dialogue, people think, oh, here we go again, same old stuff, reshoring, you know, blah, blah, blah. But these things matter that are happening today in terms of what rural America looks like in 10 years. So, Harry, I'm going to call on you first. How will your work change rural America in the next 10 years?
First, we've given people confidence. 12 years ago, nobody believed manufacturing could come back. Just knowing that it's happening, knowing that hundreds of thousands of jobs are coming back, gives any given company the belief that they can do it if they work hard at it. So we've given them that confidence, and so our objective is to balance the goods trade deficit, which had increased 6 million manufacturing jobs in the U.S., about 40%. And one of the ways we do that, we have the total cost of ownership estimator, which helps the company look at all the costs and risks associated with offshoring. And when they do that, they see that 20 or 30% of what they've offshored, they can bring back and be even more profitable than they are today. So we make it easier for companies to see that they can do that. We can also identify the companies. If a company's making a widget of some kind, you can see it, we can tell them who the biggest importers of the widgets are, and how much they're bringing in, where they're getting them from, roughly what they're paying for it. and then we send our local company to that importer to convince them to buy from them instead. So we've got real tools that can help them do that. And I'm convinced that if the rural areas take advantage of that, we'll see. I'd love to see the opioid epidemic go away and have all those people that lost their jobs when the factories shut down get a good job again and feel life is good for them again. And we'd be delighted to work with them to make that happen.
Terrific. What about you, Tuck?
Well, I certainly hope in 10 years that we do have this digital divide deployment issue solved, and so that people can, pivot to employment in where they're from and not have to move and feel empowered to participate in the economy, empowered to age at home because they have access to telemedicine, empowered to do all the things that those of us who have had access for a long time know we can do. But I think it's going to take a concerted effort on behalf of the states to really work on that other side, the part that happens after the deployment, beyond the build, where helping communities, getting those trusted community partners engaged in helping people get online, understand the relevance of the program. One of the key things in the BEAD program is that if a state happens to solve for all of its deployment issues, if it's handled the unserved and underserved areas, leftover money that has been allocated to the state can be invested in work like digital navigators and other things to help people get connected and stay connected. And I think that's the type of ongoing work that we're going to have to keep paying attention to well after the last line is pulled.
I'd like to add one more thought there that I think rural communities should keep in mind to sell their benefits. And that is, typically, if there's 5 manufacturing companies in town, let's say, the worker is going to be more loyal to their company. It's not like being in Chicago where there's 100 places you can go and you go a year here, 6 months there, 5, But I think the rural community should be selling loyalty, that when the company moves in there, they can expect the worker, if treated well, paid well, to be more likely to stay with them and develop the skills and stay on in the company and work their way ahead. And so I'd urge all the rural community to make that part of your sales pitch when you're fighting for these jobs.
I want to just close out by reminding everyone, you get a manufacturing job or a facility that employs, 50 people. That's a big deal. It's a big deal in a town of 2,000 people, and that will grow the community. But we need to have communities that people want to live in. And so I want to make the point that we wanted to start with this panel first because we wanted people to think about what that economic opportunity is. But so much of that economic opportunity is going to be so dependent on whether people want to live there, whether we can actually recruit workforce, whether there's people out there at the last mile receiving that broadband. And so housing is important, healthcare is important, education is important. And so I want to thank both of you for a delightful conversation. I want, Harry, why don't you tout your podcast, because there's probably a lot of people who want to check out some of the stuff that you've been talking about.
We do other people's podcasts, actually. But our website is reshorenow.org, reshorenow.org, and you can reach me at info@reshorenow.org, and you've got some opportunities, just contact me. We'd be happy to help.
Great. And Tuck, when people are looking for some response from Comcast, how can they get a hold of you?
Well, you could certainly look me up. It's tuck_rainwater@comcast.com, but certainly, we have people on the ground in every state capital where we have a presence, and you could look them up there as well. So,
well, we're gonna transition out and thank these two great panelists. Thank the mayor for joining us, and we look forward to our next panel, which is going to be on the issue of a tale of two countries. And so we're gonna turn this over now and thank all of our participants and the people who are tuned in. I hope this has been worth your time.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Talk to you later.
Bye.